was choosing kings. But today we are going over the very familiar story but very pivotal story of David and Goliath. And so we have to go through this story basically as a standalone to be able to understand how God used it for a greater purpose in the country of Israel. And we will do that so that next week, whenever we talk about what God was doing. But today we are just going to focus our eyes on 1 Samuel 17, be able to go through with this. Excuse me. But one of the things that I'm going to tell you guys today is that we are not covering this in its entirety. To be completely honest, if we were to do that, I think I'd be preaching 3 to 4 sermons on this one chapter, and I know some of you guys don't like it whenever I do that. So we're not going to be doing it, but what I'm going to ask of you guys, if you have not read this passage recently, as we've been going through this, whenever you go home this afternoon or this week sometime, reread this. This is, so it's 50-some verses of the story, and we're really only going to be covering roughly 30 of them today. But go through that. I'm going to kind of paraphrase some areas to kind of keep us where we're going. But please go read it. It will actually help make a little bit more sense about what we're going to talk about this morning. But with that, this is one of the main themes that is going to be coming out of this chapter, is that God's people are called to live by faith and not by sight. This is something that is incredible. That whenever we are going to look at the repercussions of living by faith rather than by sight, you can be able to see that one of these repercussions is that you are going to look ridiculous. You are going to be a standout. You are going to be somebody who is trying to move forward in faith while everybody else is saying, we can't do it, we won't do it. Okay? And that is what I mean by you will look ridiculous whenever you live by faith rather than by sight. And this is really, we're picking up in the story of how God was choosing kings. We're bringing these things about, and we're picking it up again at a time that it seems really, really bleak for the country of Israel in this moment. Okay? And so in the chapter 14, we had been talking about how Saul had absolutely blew a death blow victory with the Philistines. God had delivered the Philistines into his hand, and all he had to do was be able to take his army, lead them to the point of complete destruction, and they would not have been needing to fight them again in 1 Samuel chapter 17, but that's not what Saul did. The fact is that he compromised on the Word of God and the leading and the way that he was supposed to, and they didn't wipe them out. In fact, they left them strong enough to be able to come back and be able to make siege against Israel once again in 1 Samuel chapter 17. Of no surprise, this is what the Philistines were doing back in chapter 14. They enjoyed using the intimidation factor because they would come in, and as it said back in 13, that they came looking like the sands of the seashore. There was many soldiers coming into the country, and all the Israelite army dwindled down to 600 men. And so what did they do? They all went into hiding. And so in this story, no surprise, they are using another intimidation factor. They have their champion. His name's Goliath. And the fact is that the first few verses, or first 15 verses or so, gives a pretty impressive description of their champion. Okay, 9 foot 6 inches tall, quite obvious he's going to be a standout. But we have to be able to see that his strength comes out in the description of his armor, that he'd be wearing somewhere around 130 pounds of just armor, wearing it on him. Whenever you talk about his javelin and his spear, it had a 15-pound head on the front side of it. And whenever you think about the Olympics are coming up, there's going to be some people throwing javelins, but I promise there's not a 15-pound head on the end of one of those things, okay? And to be able to think that in the description of this, That he's not some tall dunce that is extremely uncoordinated. I mean, whenever they are describing this guy, I can't help but get this picture of not only is he big, but he is a well-trained fighter, and he is not somebody that you desire to mess with. He's much bigger than the average soldier. He comes out believing that he's going to beat any of the soldiers that come out on Israel's sides, and so therefore he is screaming insults and daring anybody from Israel's lines to come out and fight him. And you guys, you know the story. I know I don't have to tell you all of those details. But this is a force to be reckoned with, and none of Israel wants to be able to do that. And so what's already happening? The Israelite army is already weighing out their advantages or disadvantages simply by sight rather than by faith. And so this Philistine champion, of course, he's got them scared. And he sends them back into the trenches. And this is where we're going to pick up the story. David, he was sent by his father to be able to bring food to the front lines to his brother. And this is the first time he's going to hear the giant say a few of those things. And so let's just go ahead and pick up in verse 20, and we're going to read through verse 30 this morning. And so the Word of God says this, "And David rose early in the morning and left the sheep of the keeper and took the provisions and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the encampment as the host was going out to the battle line, shouting the war cry. And Israel and the Philistines drew up for battle, army against army. And David left the things in charge of the keeper of the baggage and ran to the ranks and went and greeted his brothers. As he talked with them, behold, the champion of the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, came up out of the ranks of the Philistines and spoke the same words as before. And David heard him. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were much afraid." I'm going to stop right there for just a second. And so the first things that we are seeing really isn't an uncommon thing that they would be doing. They think, hey, the Philistines are lining up for a battle. So all the Israelites, they're grabbing their weapons, and then you see the two lines there. But once the two lines are formed, then the Philistine, Goliath, he comes out in front of them and starts cursing them and defying Israel's armies and saying all of these different things, sending the Israelite army back into their trenches as they were much afraid. The first thing that I just kind of bring up, an arrogant bully really isn't all too hard to find even in our day. Okay, there's one thing that has stuck in my mind ever since I heard it. I was still in college in 2016, but that was with the time whenever Conor McGregor was making his way up. Okay, and whenever he said he was on a line of knocking people out inside of the octagon, and somebody came and asked them and said I think a reporter came and asked him, said, can anybody knock you out? And he said, if Jesus Christ was in the ring with me, that he would knock him out too, okay? That is a point-blank, arrogant statement of which I hope none of you guys have ever said something of the like. But that was a direct line to God in what Goliath was saying in the verses previous, that he was saying that I defy Israel's armies. He doesn't say anything about God, okay? But that's a really important thing, because how does David take it? If you would look in verse 25, in verse 26, "And David said to the men who stood next to him, what shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel?" Right here. "For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" Now, nobody up to this point has seen it in the same way, at least on Israel's side, of course. They have seen it as, that guy's big and scary and we're going to go hide, okay? They have not seen it as, who's this guy that's talking about our God? That makes completely, it takes David to a completely different place, and that's why the very first point is that this is faith that sees. Faith that sees reality for what it is. And so, Conor McGregor might be a direct person to say something about Jesus Christ, but more in our day, there's a lot of indirect things of where people are talking about the church of Jesus Christ, about the people inside of God's church, about His people that He has saved and has set aside for His purposes. And whenever you talk about somebody who is God's child, you are indirectly claiming that you are above God Himself. And this is the way that David is seeing the defiance against God's people. Okay? Who's this guy talking about our God? And all he's doing is talking about people. And so, whenever we're talking about the church of Christ, we have to be very careful. We do not want to step out and say something negative about one of God's children that is absolutely not true. And a lot of people who are outside of the church do say things about us. And you know what? In Psalm chapter 2, whenever God receives some sort of insult against Himself, it says this, that the kings come before Him and they'll say this or that about God. And you know what He does? He sits on His throne and laughs. Okay? He's not laughing because He's trying to do this outmatching and trash talking. He's laughing because it's not a threat to Him at all. This is the idea that whenever we insult God, we do not have the power to actually do anything about it. Okay? God is going to judge those people in the way that He sees fit, and even talking about His church brings judgment upon us as we are directly insulting God, though we have no idea that we are actually doing that. But for faithless men who are just living by sight, they don't see that specifically. The fact is, what they see is that they are at a complete disadvantage, and this is an insoluble problem. We can't do anything about it. One of the commentators wrote, I was reading this week, that focusing on outward appearances rather than the Lord's power can obscure reality and stifle faith and produce paralyzing fear. Remember back in 1 Samuel 16, that man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. Whenever we have faith in God and when we see God for whom He is, we begin to see as He sees. And so now we're kind of seeing this contrast, that the people of Israel, they are living still yet as faithless people. They do not see it for what it is, and they are paralyzed with fear. But there is one who is standing in Israel that day that is seeing as God sees, because he has faith in the God who can do something about this. And so in verse 20 to 24, we see the people, so they go ahead and flee back to this. But it said again, from their perspective, this is an unconquerable man. We cannot move forward with this. And David, he finally hears him speak, and he has this eyesight that he's able to see as God sees, as it says in verse 26. But why is that so different? I said, I would almost argue that, because, think about David's day up to this point. His father told him the day before, hey, bring some stuff up there. Yes, Dad, we're on our way. You get there, and then he's thinking, who is this uncircumcised Philistine? I just don't think that he had a half a thought about thinking he was going to meet a giant that day that he was going to have to fight. I just don't think it was really on his radar. It could have been, but I really doubt it. Okay? So why does this response just completely different? Is that the only thing I can think of that is very consistent all the way through Scripture, and I think that would be backed in the way that we're reading this, is that David maintained a consistent relationship with God, that he walked with Him daily. And so the day whenever he got there, is that it was really obvious what was going on to him, while everybody else, so they were influenced by what everybody else was thinking. David realized what was going on because he knew God. And for him, in his words, the difference for him was that there was indeed a living God who could make a difference in this situation. But not only that, not only did he believe that a living God would make a difference, he believed that the living God could make a difference through him. He believed that God's story wasn't over just because it looked like there was an unconquerable man standing in front of him. He believed that God could use him to take down something that everybody else thought was unconquerable. Do you see that? The way that he's seeing this. He's seeing this through the eyes of God and all the possibilities that what God can actually be doing, and he's ready to move forward with it. Okay? But, verse 28, whenever somebody has such a faith, they're seeing as God sees, they're saying the things that God would desire you to be able to say. Let's just say we're the faithless people in this situation. You can bet that David is making these guys feel real uncomfortable. Okay? I mean, look at what his brother's telling him in verse 28. Okay? Now Eliab, his eldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David, and he said, "Why have you come down? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness?" He's trying to make him feel real small. Okay, but the next part, "I know your presumption and the evil of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle." And David said, "What have I done now? Was it not but a word?" And he turned away from him toward another and spoke in the same way, and the people answered him again. Can you think of those people in your life that have always been very faithful? The fact, the way that they even speak makes you feel uncomfortable of like, oh, what are you going to do now? Okay, what are you going to say now? It's like, I mean, just the way that they are talking about God and the things that they think God can do just makes you feel very uncomfortable. This is David to his older brother, and an older brother doing what older brothers do. You're like, what's your problem? It's like, you're being a little jerk. It's like, you think that you can just walk in to the battle. We've been here for 40 days. We know the situation way better than you do. Why don't you go back and take care of those sheep? And he's like, am I not even allowed to talk? I mean, what are you doing? And it's like, and so with this, you think of those people who make you feel really uncomfortable. That they are probably something that the Lord is using in your life to show you where you're faithless. And the people who are faithless respond in anger often, as his older brother is doing. He wants him to be silent because it makes him feel much more comfortable, doesn't it? It's like, no, it's a lot safer here in this trench. You just need to be quiet. These are the things that whenever we're seeing those people live out their faith, and they are challenging you in your faith, that is actually something that's going to strengthen you and be much better for you if you're able to listen and be able to see if they're actually seeing the way that God does. But faith, it does see, okay? And I'm going to get off the uncomfortable talk. We'll talk about how not only does he see, but he also knows, okay? And so we are now in verses 31 through 40. I'm going to read the first few there. Verse 31. When the words of David spoke were heard, they were repeated, but they were then repeated to Saul, and he sent for him. And David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with the Philistine." Verse 33, and Saul said to David, "You are not able to go against the Philistine to fight with him, but you are but a youth, and he has been a man of war from his youth." So for about 40 days now, I guess Saul's just been waiting for a guy to get the guts enough to say, "I'll fight him." Okay, and so went ahead and reported to Saul, and so he said, "Well, bring him here." Then he sees him. Okay, and he's like, "You're a teenager." I would assume he doesn't even have facial hair at this time because it makes a really big deal to say that you're just a youth. Okay, you're just somebody that has never even seen battle before, and so whenever Saul sees him, he's like, "This ain't the guy. This just isn't him." Okay. This is again part where let's just say that we are being the faithful people, trying to live out the faith the way that we know God has called us to. We're living out the Bible. This is something we can all expect. Okay. As the people try to talk you out of what you know God has called you to do. There's people who's going to discourage you from it. You are too young. You're not smart enough. You don't have enough influence. There could be a lot of different things that people just discredit them for that. But here, it's exactly what Saul's doing. You're a youth. The guy you're fighting has been a warrior since his youth. You're not going. Okay? But David, he is a guy that he has seen the things that God can be doing through him. Remember that. He knows that God is going to deliver him, and we'll talk about why he knows in a second. But this has been a real problem in Israel under Saul's rule, hasn't it? Dwindles down to the 600. God sends somebody who has a little bit of faith to be able to deliver Saul and all of Israel. Who was his name? What was his name again? It was Jonathan. What did he say? Let's go see. God can deliver through little or a lot. We don't know. Let's go see. And so they run the army, moves it back out. And so this is something that whenever we're reading this story, it is pointing us to Christ over and over again, is that we would actually be able to relate more to Saul and the Israelite army being faithless over and over again. And we're in need of God to send somebody of faith to deliver us over and over again. This is something that is pointing to Jesus Christ, that he would be the ultimate deliverer. But whenever God does send David, he is rejected by his own. He's trying to be pushed out, and they're saying that you're not the guy. They said, but why does David actually believe that God is able to use him? I said it a little bit earlier, that he walks with God daily, but here is one of the greatest things that David does throughout his life that you and I need to learn to make a habit of, and that is that he recounts the past working of God in his life. And it seems like he does it often. If you were at the men's retreat, we talked about him doing it at the end of his life. Here he's doing it at the beginning of his life. And so what does he say? If you look with me now in verse 34, we'll read there. David said to Saul in response, your servant used to keep sheep for his father, and when there came a lion or a bear and took a lamb from the flock, I went after him and struck him and delivered it out of his mouth. And if he arose against me, I caught him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God. In verse 37, and David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. See what he's doing. This isn't him saying, this is my courage, this is what I've been doing, this is all of these other things. This is what God has allowed me to do in the past, and I fully expect him to do it again in the present, is what he's saying. He's saying that I was absolutely outmatched against a lion, and God delivered me. It's like I was absolutely outmatched against a bear, and God delivered me. Why wouldn't he deliver me now, today? And so, looking back in the past, what if Saul was just doing that? He'd have plenty to recount, and he'd have plenty to give him enough faith to continue to move forward. You and I, if you've been following God at all throughout your life, you have something to look back on and say, but the Lord is faithful indeed. And so the Lord was faithful, and why would I doubt his faithfulness today? Okay, so this is the thing that is giving David the courage, knowing that God has already done a work. And so, like we said earlier, a living God does make all the difference, doesn't it? Faith in the living God makes all of the difference. The faith in the living God that he could use you will make all of the difference. Knowing that God is going to work out his story through you, because that's the way that he's always done these things, makes all the difference in the world. But one of the things I am going to say this morning is that we're not going to preach this message in a way that's where I ask you this question. What are the giants in your life that need to be struck down? The reason is that this passage is not about you or the giants in your life. This passage is about the people of God coming in weakness to do the things that God has called them to do because there is an adequate God behind them. That is what this passage is about. Look here, in weakness, David prepares. See what he does. Saul's like, okay, whatever. The Lord go with you. And then he's like, here's my armor, here's my helmet, here's my sword. Put all this stuff on. David puts it all on, and he's like, man, I haven't tested this. Takes it all back off, and he says, I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them. So David put them off, and then right here, then he took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones from the brook and put them in the shepherd's pouch. His sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistines. We'll just stop right there. Notice what he does. He does not try to match Goliath weapon for weapon or defensive weaponry for defensive weaponry. He simply looks at what God has already been using in the past, and he goes ahead and moves forward in that. Notice what he's doing. He is preparing in weakness with faith that God will still come through. We are called to be able to live our lives in weakness. It's like, and so in 2 Corinthians 12:9, we have actually memorized this verse recently. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. You can see this in David. I expect the power of God to rest upon me. I have no need of modern day weapons. I have no need for the things of this world. I need God to do a work through me. That's where his faith is. And so we see him go from he's seeing the way God does. And so now he knows that God's going to deliver him. But let's see if he actually follows through. You guys know this. But let's see if he actually follows through and his faith is acting. Verses 41 through 51. If you guys already know the story, I'm going to read those in a second. You guys already know the story. David does come out on top. But we kind of got an idea while we were in Panama, maybe how this happened. Okay? Just talking from a pure physical standpoint, whenever we were in Panama, we had the Panama country is known for shutting down their highways in protest, not a violent protest, but they just shut down the highways, and the authorities just let them do it for however long, and then they'll open them back up. And so, in order for us to be sure that we don't miss a flight, they build in an extra day for us not to miss a flight. And so we never saw any protest. And so they allowed us to be able to go fishing almost on one day, okay? And so this was the lake that runs into the Panama Canal. And so they had us all spread out on these little John boats or whatever else, and we were fishing. We get back, and there was a guy named Aubrey. He's from Elk City, and he had blood gushing. I mean, it had been gushing, just came down his face and everything like that. And what had happened was that there was a guy in the front of the boat. Let's just say he wasn't real skilled with a fishing pole, but it said he got caught on a log and he started jerking on it. Okay, and so he's jerking, and then it lets go, and the fishing weight comes back and hits Aubrey right here. Okay, and it's like, and Aubrey, pretty fit guy. Okay, I wouldn't want to tangle with him. He literally crumbles. Okay, and he blacks out, and whenever he wakes up, and it's like, I mean, we're talking like seconds of blacking out, that he was hugging the other guy's legs and just on the ground, as like in the boat and everything, as whenever he woke up, and he just said, I mean, I just blacked out whenever that thing hit him. I don't know how fast the thing was going. Could have been a lot worse than what it was. Whenever David throws his stone, okay, it was a miracle that a 2 to 3 inch stone landed where it was. A lot of people would say, man, David was real skilled with it. I have no doubt that he was skilled with it. But to throw that thing 100 miles an hour and land it where it was, that is a major thing. But verse 41, look at this. And the Philistine moved forward and came near David because he sees somebody coming out to him and his shield bearer in front of him. And when the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. And the Philistine said to David, am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? I'm going to stop right there for a second. What is he mocking? He's mocking his weakness. He's mocking in the things that he prepared. Okay, he prepared with the things that he believed God was going to use to deliver him with it. Okay, he's mocking the things that he doesn't have. And he thinks, and this is like in the way that the giant is mocking it, he's trying to make him realize or make him think that you don't measure up. You don't have the things. And the fact is, you're a dog. So you're a boy, and it's as if you're coming to me with sticks. He is trying to point out the very weaknesses that David had already prepared him. So now, I want to just stop right there, put ourselves in such a situation that it feels much bigger to us, and we come in our weakness as a Christian. This is whenever my faith begins to fail. It's like, and I'm being completely honest, because this is typically what goes on in my mind. That I'm saying, Lord, you know that I believe, but what if, and I start filling in the blanks after that. What if I assumed? What if I'm wrong? What if, Lord, I didn't hear you right? Okay, are you sure you called me to fight this giant? What if this? What if that? And that's typically where a lot of people's faith begins to fail right there. Being ignited by what the enemy is telling them. A lot of times pointing out the things that we're very self-conscious about and we think is a weakness. Okay? Here's the deal. He curses them by his gods, and he says, you come to me and I'm going to finish you off, and this is going to be over. Has a lot of confidence in that. Notice what David does right here, though. And I'm going to just tell you, and then I'm going to read it. He does not let someone who doesn't even know God tell him what he's supposed to believe about God. Okay? So it's in verse 45, then David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand. And we're going to stop right there for a second. See that? The giant doesn't define what he believes about God. Not only does his past experience define what he believes about God, but the things that God has done over and over and over again in his life is the consistent things that he brings to mind. And not only that, but he's bringing up the things that God has done that he has heard all of his life, and the things that God has done throughout Scripture is that the Lord of hosts is the one who is the God of the armies, and that the battle completely belongs to him. He does not allow people who are outside of the church define what the church believes on the inside, because that can never happen and actually fully function the way that we're supposed to. But not only that, but what does he say? I said at the end or beginning of verse 47. This is about to be a reminder to all of God's people that what? That they may know that the Lord saves not with sword and not with a spear. I said, I can't help but think about all of the things that people bring up to my mind. I'm not talking about you guys about how we're to grow a church. I'm talking about people who think that they know what they're really doing, okay? It's like that they're telling me how to grow a church. We need this marketing scheme, that marketing scheme. We need to do this. We need to have this Sunday school, whatever it might be that the church gurus are telling us about, of which we have to believe as a church that the battle belongs to the Lord, and we don't need worldly things to be able to grow his church. As what he's saying here, we don't win by worldly weapons. We win because the battle belongs to God. As I said earlier, this is not a passage about how you're going to destroy a giant in your life. It is about the God who is that is very adequate to do the things that through our weakness in order for us to be able to move forward as God's people. That's the calling of this. See what he's doing here. This is an incredible passage talking about how God is absolutely capable. And so, all it took, though, was a guy, one person, one boy, one teenager to come forward who sees as God sees, whose faith would be able to know that God would ultimately be able to come through, and that he would act on his faith and never let anybody talk him out of it. Okay? This comes from him walking daily with the Lord and actually having the Spirit of God come about him. And as I said earlier, I believe it's an absolute miracle he landed that rock where he did. Who made him capable of doing that? It was only God himself. For the battle belongs to God. It sinks into his forehead, and then you guys know the rest of the story. The boys enjoy telling it. David runs, takes Goliath's swords, and goes ahead and finishes him off by cutting off his head. And all the God's people said amen, right? But can you see how this extraordinary thing happened because David was living his faith in the ordinary day? That's essentially what was going on. He was just simply living out his faith because he loved God and he really believed in him. And so with this, he sees the mocking giant for what he was. He was mocking God. David was extremely concerned about the honor of his God because he was that close to him. He wasn't so worried about all of the people. He was worried about God in that moment. And so he was going to act on God's behalf, knowing that God would come through for him. But as our daily walk defines us, it defines what we are going to do in decisive moments as well. If we have no daily walk with him, I can probably bet what you're going to do in a decisive moment, and that is that you're going to run in fear and probably be somebody who is trying to talk the people who have faith out of doing what they are called to do. But if you are walking in faith, and I hope we have 30 people, 40 people, 50 people who are willing to do that, because it makes it much easier to do what's right in a decisive moment whenever everybody's seeing as God sees. And so this is a reminder to the people of Israel. And they begin to turn back to God whenever they had a king who was leading them away from God. This is the turning point for the country of Israel. And so with this, I would ask, if you do not already have a walk with God, you don't believe in God, you don't see as God sees, as I pray, as I end this prayer, right now would be a time for you to respond and say, I want to put my faith in Jesus, for he was the man whom God sent into the world to be able to deliver us from our selfishness and our sins. Not only that, perhaps you've already been called, and you've been struggling to know the Lord, the will come through in this situation or that situation. Be reminded this morning, as the assembly of Israel was reminded. God is absolutely faithful, and he's absolutely capable. Maybe you've been called to a deeper service, devotion, something. If you want to be able to see God work through your weaknesses, he only does so through people who desires to serve him through ministry. It is no secret to me, though I forget it pretty often, as I work and do ministry, that I have a lot of weaknesses, but God is capable, and he comes through time after time. If you want to see that happen in your own life, begin to serve him. And so begin to become more involved in the church ministry of whatever that is, and you will begin to experience that for yourself. We are to act on our faith. And so the call is, do not live by sight, but by faith in the living God. If you guys pray with me now.